Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 155 with John Greenham. I'm so excited about this episode. John's an amazing mastering engineer, and he's worked with some of my favorite artists, including Billie Eilish, Finneas, and Bo Burnham. And so I'm just like a fan of his work. And this was a really eye-opening interview. I learned so much. We talk about why being in LA is so important, his philosophy when it comes to mastering, including approaching mastering from a musician's mindset, working fast, focusing on the vocals. We talk about working with Billie Eilish and Finneas, loudness, Atmos, working with your friends, and so much more. So I really love this conversation, and I think you will too. So with all that to say, here's my chat with John Greenham coming up right here on Secret Sonics. Hey everyone. If you're anything like me, you often find yourself looking for business insight in podcasts. And I'm sure many of you are also into meditation and reflection to help better understand yourself. Former guest of the show, Carl Bonner, decided to launch a podcast that brings these two elements together. It's a series of guided self-reflection exercises, but specifically for freelance creatives like you and me, focusing on the struggles we face as we try to grow our businesses, while also finding more happiness in the work that we do. It's called Thanks for Thinking. It's definitely an unusual format, but if you want to grow your self-awareness, find deeper career satisfaction, and make more money, then I think this podcast might be for you. Experience it for yourself and click the link in the show notes below. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is John Greenham. John is a Grammy-winning mastering engineer known for working with Billie Eilish, Billy Idol, Finneas, Muramasa, Cautious Clay, Lady Gaga, Bo Burnham, and many, many more. Former guest of the show, Sam Sherbin, recently mentioned that he had been working with John, and having had seen a video of John's for Mix with the Masters on YouTube that I really enjoyed, I reached out to see if he'd be willing to join me on the show, which he graciously agreed to do. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, John.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
It's an absolute pleasure. How are things? You're in Los Angeles, I'm assuming.
I'm in Los Angeles, yeah. It's kind of hot today here. We've got a heat wave going on, so... Where are you, by the way?
I know that. I'm in Jerusalem, Israel, so I know about the heat.
Okay, yeah, right. All right, cool.
Yeah, originally from New York, but I live in Israel. So I think we're both expats, so to speak.
Yeah, cool. Well, your government just dissolved, apparently.
It literally this evening.
Yeah. I was reading about that in the Times this morning.
Yeah, it was a very interesting government. Honestly, kind of sad to see it go. It was nice to have a change of pace. Right. We'll see what happens.
So is this the return of Bibi then?
We shall see.
We shall see.
I don't know. We'll see what the people vote for.
Yeah.
That's what it all comes down to.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your story, how you ended up in California from England. I guess we'll start with music. Like, when did music become a thing for you? And tell me a bit about how that turned into mastering and audio engineering and the things that you're doing.
Yeah. I've always been... Well, since early teens, I played music. So I'm a musician, basically, which I feel like is kind of the basic qualification for, working on music is to understand music and have played music. Although there are people who actually, believe it or not, they become recording engineers and they do stuff and they don't play music at all. I don't know how they do it, because if you haven't stood on a stage with somebody playing a Les Paul through a Marshall half stack and sort of experienced how that is, then I don't know. There's a certain sort of excitement in music that you hear in the kind of live thing with people playing. And I think in a way that's kind of what you're striving for in the finished product as well. It's kind of like that kind of feeling that, it's really going over in front of a crowd and people are really excited and so forth. That's kind of what we strive to recreate somehow. Yeah,
that emotion and energy.
Yeah. So my music career was not very successful, basically because, I was in a series of quite promising situations in England, and then the band would break up, and it's incredibly difficult, really. It's, just usually just at the point where you're about to have some success, things fall apart. That was my experience with it anyway. So I moved to San Francisco actually in the 80s, mainly, I think, because of the weather, actually. The weather in London is, it's pretty bad. Continued playing and then slowly kind of got into engineering. And then mastering sort of came into focus when I met this guy who had worked at Bernie Grundman, who had moved up to San Francisco. And he'd worked at Bernie's place. And, the mastering thing is there's a lot to be said for it, really. It's like, that's what I saw right away. I was actually, the thing that really fascinated me was the way that you could sort of open up an entire mix with just one very small EQ move in the right place, and it would suddenly sound sort of right. And I experienced that happening with my friend working on some music one day. And I was like, that's actually really interesting how just these very, very small things can actually make a big difference.
Yeah.
So I've sort of been chasing that thing ever since, and that's kind of why, I'm still doing it I guess I've been doing it full time for like 25 years or something now. And it doesn't really get boring because everything is different. There's every different source material, different artists, different players, hopefully different. They're not all using the same samples. So it's all different. Everything's different. You can't, what worked for one thing is not going to work for the next thing generally, although sometimes it does, I guess. Yeah, so that's kind of my trajectory. It's just music is really, I suppose it's the only thing that I really know anything about, honestly. What else would I do? I don't know.
Yeah. Right. A lot of us can't picture doing anything else other than music.
No, and so actually even
just
people,
keep at it.
Yeah, even people who I've worked with people who were in bands and quit and had a career as a lawyer, and then 30 years later they're back making another record. You can never you can never get away from it, honestly.
It's a bug that just keeps coming back.
Yeah, it'll keep coming back. You'll be like 75 and you'll be retired from your job and you'll be making an album again,
Yeah, it's like you said, like it's so hard to be an artist, right? But these artists just keep doing it and keep persevering, and it's just like wild. It's like, why are you still doing this? It's like, no, you got this thing inside that you just can't stop.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's honestly, playing in front of a group of people when it's going over and everybody's enjoying it is one of the best things that you can experience, really. There's not many things that are better than that, if any.
Yeah. That's why I personally am having a hard time separating myself from the performance side of things. I don't perform much, but it's hard for me to like kind of cut gigging out altogether because just standing on stage with the bass gives me joy. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's something special about that.
Yeah. I haven't done that for a long time. I mean, I actually ended up over at some friend's house playing music with people for the first time for a long time, I realized the other night. And it's just it's actually really fun. It's like meditation. It's very makes you feel really good. You're kind of completely focused on listening to what the other people are playing and sorting out how you're going to contribute. And it's kind of this it has a very beneficial effect on the mind, actually. It makes you feel really good. It's much more fun than...
amazing.
I mean, sitting around talking is fun too, but sitting around and playing music is actually more fun.
The most fun.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about your mastering journey. Did you have any mentors or anybody that kind of helped guide you at the beginning when you kind of transitioned into that role?
Well, my first exposure to really sort of high-end mastering was a guy named Paul Stubblebine in San Francisco who, Paul was kind of, a gearhead. I mean, he had like sort of the EAR, Pultecs and, the limiters and stuff, which are really good. And he had Pacific Microsonics converters when they were like $18,000 each. He had like 3 of them. And he just let me work in his room. And, when I started working there, I didn't really have any idea what any of those things were. It was fairly complicated. But I just started doing stuff. He didn't really show me anything, actually. It was just like, okay, here's this, just, have at it. I'm not sure that you can really teach people about mastering. I mean, I suppose you can, but it's basically an aesthetic. It's like you fiddle about with stuff and you get it to sound the way you want it to sound. I mean, there's not much else to it, really. And in fact, if you sort of are involved in the technical details too much, it's probably not that good of an idea, honestly. You just twist the knobs and get something good happening. Don't look at it too much because it might not make any sense.
Yeah. I think I was talking to another mastering engineer recently on the podcast, and he was just saying, like, having this, like, we were just talking about having a vast library of music in your head being like the number one, prerequisite to becoming a mastering engineer is just knowing what things sound like and how they should feel like. And the mastering headspace is really like the gestalt of the song, right? You're listening to the forest really more than the individual trees. And so, I feel like you got to just know your music, and know what it's supposed to sound like. Yeah.
I think you have to know what finished sounds like. That's the thing. So you kind of, I think really most of the time you put it up, you get the song and you put it up and you're like, you can hear how you want it to sound like right away. Usually in the first like quarter of a second or something. It's like, you're like, okay, you've got the whole picture usually, and then you set about trying to see if that's possible. That's kind of usually what happens for me is that I hear it right away, the way that I want it to sound.
It's instinctual.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you don't have to think about it a lot, really. It's just, that's going to be really good if we do this, this, and this. It's like a very short process. There's not that many things to think about. Would it sound good through some sort of tube processing? Would it sound good, in the box? Would it sound good with just solid state stuff? So then you just try things and see what happens. It doesn't always work out the way that you thought it would at the beginning, but it's a pretty simple process.
I love it. Just going back to your journey for half a second. So I know you worked at Infrasonic for a while before going freelance and opening your own space. What was that transition like?
Yeah, I've sort of gone back and forth between. You kind of want to support studios because if everybody works at home, then there won't be any studios left. So I've sort of gone back and forth quite a few times between working like in a house or at home and working in a facility. So when I came down to LA, they had a pretty intense vision of what they wanted to do. Infrasonic seemed like it would be fun, And it was. I worked there for about 4 years or so. And, it was interesting because I moved down to LA and I didn't really know anyone down here. Except Eric Valentine.
Oh, yeah.
Who's a friend of mine. A few other
He's
people.
Amazing.
Yeah, Eric's been a very interesting guy. A few other people, but basically, I didn't know anyone. And the Infrasonic was above Vintage King, which is, an equipment retailer, I guess. And so a lot of people came through there and we had parties and stuff. So I met a lot of people through them. So it was good from that point of view. The problem with working in studios is that eventually, there's always sort of politics of some kind. It's like the building is owned by this person and then something happens with that. And then, I don't know, there's always stuff going on that's beyond your control. If you work in your house, then you're just, you sort of eliminate a lot of variables, basically. It's just you. So, I might actually, I'm considering at the moment getting it out of my house again and
really
getting a facility together of some kind, although the economy is now in really bad shape. So it's probably not a very good time to do anything, honestly.
Yeah.